Picture this. You're Dr. Zelfin, a Karathi scientist who thought he'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. You spent your entire career studying the most dangerous phenomena in space, from collapsing stars to sentient black holes. But right now, floating in a crippled research station that's slowly dying around you, you're facing something scarier than any cosmic horror: the complete indifference of civilized space. 3 days ago, your research station was humming along perfectly. You and your team of 12 were out here in the middle of nowhere, studying some fascinating energy readings that had caught the attention of the Galactic Science Council. Standard deep space research mission, the kind you'd done dozens of times before. Then everything went wrong at once. First, the primary engines just died, not gradually, not with warning signs, just completely shut down like someone flipped a switch. Then the backup systems started failing one by one. Life support, artificial gravity, even the food processors began giving error messages that made no sense. Now you're drifting in the cold emptiness between star systems, watching your atmospheric readings drop hour by hour. The recyclers are working overtime, but they're old technology, designed for a crew half your size. Every breath you take brings you closer to that moment when the air will run out completely. Your fellow researchers try to stay busy with repairs, but everyone knows the truth. Without a proper shipyard and replacement parts, this station is nothing more than an expensive coffin. So you did what any sensible being would do. You started calling for help. The emergency beacon went out first, broadcasting on all the standard rescue frequencies. Then personal messages to every contact you had in the scientific community. Then formal requests through official channels. The responses started trickling in, and each one felt like a punch to your 4 stomachs. The hegemony was first to respond. These guys run half the galaxy's trade routes and have rescue ships stationed everywhere. Their message was polite but firm. Current solar storm activity makes rescue operations inadvisable in your sector. Recommend waiting for conditions to improve. You check the weather reports. No storms anywhere near your position. The Trade Consortium came next. If anyone should care about saving a research team, it should be them. Your discoveries often lead to profitable new technologies. Their response was even more crushing. After careful analysis of fuel costs, crew hazard pay, and equipment depreciation, a rescue mission to your coordinates is not financially viable. We suggest contacting local emergency services. Local emergency services. You're floating between star systems, light years from the nearest inhabited planet. One by one, every major power in the galaxy found excuses. The Academic Alliance was reviewing your request through proper channels, a process that typically takes 6 months. The merchant guilds were experiencing temporary fleet shortages. Even the Freelancers Union, usually desperate for paying jobs, claimed they had no ships available in your region. You started to understand something horrible. It wasn't that they couldn't help, they just wouldn't. Your research station was too far out, the rescue too expensive, the risk too high for beings who valued comfort over compassion. In a galaxy full of trillion-credit trade deals and million-ship armadas, 12 scientists trapped in a dying station simply didn't matter enough. That's when desperation set in. You started broadcasting on frequencies you'd never used before, reaching out to systems that most civilized beings pretended didn't exist. Pirate havens, rogue colonies, even those weird isolated worlds that kept to themselves. Most didn't respond at all. A few sent back messages that were either incomprehensible or downright threatening. But then on the 3rd day, when your oxygen readings had dropped into the yellow zone and you were starting to ration food, something impossible happened. A response came crackling through the static from coordinates that made you check your star charts twice. The signal was rough, clearly transmitted through outdated equipment. But there was something about it that made your scales tingle with hope and fear. This is Earth Vessel Resilience responding to distress call. We have received your coordinates and situation report. Rescue mission is being prepared. We're coming. Earth. You'd heard whispers about that system, usually in the kind of conversations that happen late at night in spacer bars. Every official star chart marked it the same way. Quarantined, primitive death world, contact prohibited. Nobody talked about what those warnings really meant. Some said the whole system was poisonous. Others claimed it was home to creatures so violent that even the hegemony's battle fleets wouldn't go near it. But someone from that forbidden world had just volunteered to save you. As you stare at the message, reading it over and over, one thought kept running through your mind. What kind of beings chose to live on a death world, and what would they want in return for saving 12 stranded scientists? Dr. Zelthan had seen a lot of ships in his long career. Sleek hegemony cruisers with their mirror-bright hulls and perfect lines. Massive trade consortium vessels that looked more like floating cities than spacecraft. Even the odd pirate ship or two, usually stolen military hardware with fresh paint jobs and extra weapons bolted on wherever they'd fit. Nothing had prepared him for what dropped out of hyperspace 3 days after that impossible message from Earth. The first thing that hit you about the Resilience was that it shouldn't exist. Not according to any design principles taught in galactic engineering schools. Anyway, where every civilized ship followed the same basic rules. Smooth surfaces to reduce stress points, standardized components for easy maintenance, elegant curves that spoke a computer-aided design. This thing looked like someone had taken those rules and thrown them out the nearest airlock. The hull was a patchwork of different metals, some sections clearly newer than others. Scorch marks ran along the sides like battle scars, but they weren't the clean burns you'd expect from energy weapons. These looked like the kind of damage you'd get from flying to the tail of a comet, or maybe skimming too close to solar flare. Instead of the usual smooth docking ports and sensor arrays, this ship bristled with add-ons and modifications. Extra antenna arrays had been welded directly to the hull. What looked like additional fuel tanks were strapped to the underside with heavy-duty magnetic clamps. Even the engine configuration was wrong. Instead of the standard twin drives, the Resilience had 4 smaller engines arranged in a pattern that should have made it impossible to fly straight. But somehow, impossibly, it moved through space with a grace that put Zelthan's research station to shame. As he watched through the observation deck, the alien ship performed maneuvers that would have required a dozen micro-adjustments from a computer-controlled vessel. Yet there was something organic about how it moved, like it was being flown by someone who understood space not as a hostile environment to be conquered, but as a natural element to be navigated. That's when Captain Tom Bradley's voice crackled through the communications array, and Zelthan got his first real surprise. The voice was calm, steady, with an accent unlike anything in the galactic language databases. But more than that, there was something in Bradley's tone that spoke of absolute confidence. Not the arrogance you sometimes heard from hegemony officers, or the calculated politeness of trade consortium negotiators. This was the voice of someone who had seen problems before and knew exactly how to solve them. Research Station Delta 7. This is Captain Bradley aboard the Resilience. We've got your situation report, and we're moving into position for rescue operations. Please prepare your crew for evacuation procedures. We'll have you out of there in no time. Zelthan found himself studying the approaching ship more carefully, trying to spot the docking bay or transfer tunnel that would allow his crew to move safely between vessels. Standard rescue protocol called for either a hard dock connection or a pressurized shuttle transfer. Both required specialized equipment and careful positioning. But as he watched, he realized the Resilience didn't seem to have either. That's when he got his first glimpse of the beings inside the rescue ship, and everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization got turned upside down. The humans, and that's what they called themselves, though the word meant nothing in any language database, were unlike anything Zelthan had encountered in 40 years of deep space research. For starters, their eyes faced forward, not to the sides like most intelligent species. In nature, forward-facing eyes meant one thing: predator. These beings had evolved from hunters, not prey animals or peaceful herbivores. But it wasn't just their eyes that set them apart. Where most spacefaring species were tall and thin, adapted for low-gravity environments and cramped ship corridors, these humans were compact and solid. Even through their ship's viewports, you could see the way they moved, not with the careful, energy-conserving steps of beings who had spent generations in artificial gravity, but with a fluid power that suggested strength held in reserve. They moved through their cramped, improvised ship like they owned not just a vessel, but the entire universe around it. There was no hesitation, no careful navigation of tight spaces. These beings had clearly grown up in an environment where hesitation meant death, and second-guessing yourself was a luxury you couldn't afford. Then Captain Bradley said something that made Zelthan's translator work overtime. Convinced it had made an error, we'll be conducting external repairs to restore your life support systems. My crew will begin EVA operations as soon as we're in position. Should have your atmospheric processors back online within 12 hours. EVA operations, extravehicular activity, working outside the ship in the hard vacuum of space, with nothing between you and the cosmic radiation but a thin environmental suit. Zelthan checked his translator 3 times, certain something had been lost in the conversion. No intelligent species worked in vacuum without proper facilities, pressurized repair bays, robotic manipulation arms, at minimum a fully equipped maintenance shuttle. But as he watched the Resilience maneuver closer to his dying station, Zelthan began to realize something that chilled his blood and filled him with desperate hope at the same time. These humans weren't following the rules because they'd never learned them. They were the product of something the galaxy had spent centuries trying to forget existed. A world so harsh that its children had grown up thinking the impossible was just another day's work. Dr. Zelthan pressed his face against the observation port, watching something that defied every safety protocol he'd learned in 4 decades of space travel. The human crew was suiting up for what they casually called EVA work, extravehicular activity, like they were getting ready for a routine maintenance check instead of stepping into the most hostile environment known to science. The suits themselves were a shock. Where Zelthan expected to see the bulky, heavily armored environmental gear that civilized species use for emergency spacewalks, the humans were climbing into what looked like thick fabric with some metal plates attached. Their helmets were simple, transparent domes. No multiple backup systems. No emergency atmosphere reserves that could keep someone alive for days if something went wrong. These suits looked like they'd been designed by someone who thought space was just another workplace hazard, like bad weather or rough terrain. Captain Bradley was the first one ready, and Zelthan watched in fascination as the human checked his equipment with the same casual attention most people gave to putting on shoes. A plasma torch here, some kind of welding gear there, tools that Zelthan recognized but had never seen anyone plan to use in hard vacuum. The captain's movements were smooth and practiced. This was his first time stepping into the void between stars. What happened next made Zelthan question everything he knew about the laws of physics and common sense. The airlock cycled, and 5 humans just walked out into space. Not the careful, tentative steps of beings who knew they were one suit failure away from death. These humans moved like they owned the vacuum around them. They spread out along the research station's hull with the confidence of workers who'd done this job 1,000 times before. Bradley took point, positioning himself at the main life support intake, where the critical failure had occurred 3 days earlier. Through the station's external sensors, Zelthan could hear the human's voice, calm and professional as he directed his team. There was no fear in that voice, no acknowledgement that they were working in conditions that would kill most beings in seconds. All right, team, we got a primary recycler failure, and what looks like a cascade breakdown in the atmospheric processors. Jake, I need you on the backup systems. Danny, start running new power coupling to Section C. Lisa, you're with me on the main unit. Zelthan watched Jake Miller maneuver around to the station's underside, moving with an ease that suggested he'd spent more time in vacuum than most spacers spend in their own ships. The human attached himself to the hull with magnetic clamps and immediately started cutting through damaged plating with his plasma torch. The tool that should have required a full maintenance bay and robotic assistance was being wielded by hand, in absolute zero temperature, like it was the most natural thing in the universe. That's when the impossible became terrifying. Miller's suit developed a leak. Zelthan saw it happen through the sensors. A small puncture in the arm section, probably from a piece of sharp debris. By all the rules of civilized space travel, this should have been a catastrophic emergency. Immediate evacuation, emergency medical response, possibly even abandoning the rescue mission to save Miller's life. Instead, Zelthan watched something that made his 4 heart skip beats. Miller's teammates didn't panic. They didn't even seem particularly concerned. Danny just floated over, pulled out what looked like a simple patch kit, and sealed the breach while Miller kept working with his good arm. The whole emergency took maybe 2 minutes to resolve. Then they went right back to fixing Zelthan's station like nothing had happened. "Good catch, Danny," was all Miller said, his voice carrying clearly through the comm system. These older hull sections are sharper than they look. For the next 16 hours, Zelthan watched these humans perform miracles that should have been impossible. They rewired entire sections of the life support system while floating in hard vacuum. They replaced components that were supposed to require specialized docking facilities, doing the work with hand tools and improvised solutions that somehow worked better than the original design. Bradley worked alongside his crew the entire time, never asking him to do anything he wouldn't do himself. When the main atmospheric processor required someone to crawl inside a space barely big enough for a human body, the captain went first. When they needed to test systems that could have electrocuted anyone touching them, Bradley did the testing himself. What amazed Zelthan most wasn't just their technical skill or their fearlessness. It was how they worked together. No complex command structures, no detailed safety briefings, no endless protocols. These humans moved like a pack of predators, each one knowing instinctively what the others would do next. 18 hours after they started, the impossible was complete. Zelthan's research station was running better than it had in years. The life support systems weren't just repaired. They were improved, running more efficiently than the day they'd been installed. The atmospheric readings were deep into the green zone, and every backup system was functioning perfectly. And the humans were already packing up their tools, like saving 12 lives from certain death was just another job completed. As Zelthan watched them prepare to return to their patchwork ship, one thought kept running through his mind. What kind of world produced beings who treated the impossible as routine, and what would happen when the galaxy finally met them as equals instead of curiosities? Dr. Zelthan had been working up the courage for hours. Ever since the humans had finished their impossible repairs and were preparing to leave, one question had been burning in his mind like a plasma torch. He'd watched these beings casually accomplish feats that should have killed them, seen them treat the vacuum of space like a minor workplace hazard, and witnessed their ship that looked like it had been assembled by someone who'd never read an engineering manual, yet somehow flew better than vessels designed by the galaxy's best minds. The question that kept them awake wasn't about their technology or their methods. It was about the warning label every civilized world had slapped on their home system. Finally, as Captain Bradley was running final systems checks before departure, Zelthan found his voice. Captain Bradley, if I may ask, your home world. Every star chart in the galaxy marks your system as quarantined. Primitive Deathworld, contact prohibited. What does that actually mean? What makes Earth so dangerous that the entire galactic community avoids it? The question hung in the air between their ships, transmitted across the void through communication arrays that had just saved Zelthan's life. For a moment, he wondered if he'd overstepped some boundary, asked something he shouldn't have. Then Bradley's laugh came through the speakers, warm and genuinely amused, and Zelthan realized he was about to learn something that would change how he saw the universe forever. Doc, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about that quarantine. See, Earth isn't marked off limits to keep us in. It's marked to keep everybody else out. That primitive death world label got slapped on our system after the first contact team took one look at our planet's specifications and decided they'd rather not stick around for a closer examination. Zelthan's translator worked overtime, certain it had missed something crucial. I'm sorry, Captain, but I don't understand. If your world is dangerous, surely the quarantine is meant to protect. To protect other species from accidentally killing themselves trying to visit us, Bradley interrupted, and there was something in his tone that made Zelthan's scales prickle with unease. Doc, let me paint you a picture of what we call home, and maybe you'll understand why the galactic community decided to just pretend we don't exist. What followed was 15 minutes of the most terrifying planetary description Zelthan had ever heard, delivered by Bradley in the same casual tone most people use to discuss their lunch plans. Let's start with gravity. Standard Earth gravity would flatten most species I've met in the galaxy. We're talking about a force that's roughly twice what your average spacefaring civilization considers comfortable. Most beings visiting Earth would need powered exoskeletons just to walk around without their bones snapping. Zelthan felt his foreheart skip a beat. Twice standard gravity? The humans had been working in his station's artificial gravity field, which was set to Karathi's standard, roughly half of what they were used to. No wonder they'd moved with such fluid power. Bradley continued, warming to his subject. Then there's our atmosphere. It's roughly 21% oxygen, which sounds reasonable until you realize that oxygen is incredibly corrosive. Most organic materials break down quickly in our air. A lot of species would find our atmosphere slowly eating away at their respiratory systems. And that's when the air is clean. We got weather systems that can drop the local atmosphere to near toxic levels with dust, pollen, and other particles. Weather systems, Zelfin repeated weakly. Oh, that's the fun part. Earth weather doesn't mess around. We get storms that can level cities, with wind speeds that would turn most structures into flying debris, lightning strikes that could power a small space station, tornadoes that pick up everything in their path and throw it around like toys. And that's just the regular weather. Don't get me started on hurricanes, blizzards, or what we call fire season. Zelfin was beginning to understand why the first contact team had filed their report and requested immediate transfer to a different sector. But here's where it gets really interesting, Bradley continued, and Zelfin could hear the grin in his voice. Our ecosystem. See, Earth had this thing called natural selection, and it got really creative over the years. Most of our plants are toxic to some degree. We got trees that can kill you just by standing under them in the rain. Our food crops require careful preparation to avoid poisoning. Even our domestic animals could seriously injure most galactic species. And the wild animals? Zelfin asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Well, let's put it this way. We got predators that hunt in packs, others that can crush bones with their bite strength, and some that are just walking bundles of venom and bad attitude. We've got insects that can drop a full-grown human, ocean creatures that make our warships look small, and that's not even getting into the microscopic life forms that spend their time trying to kill everything around them. The communication channel went quiet for a long moment. Zelfin was trying to process what he'd just heard, a world that seemed designed to kill anything that lived on it, inhabited by beings who spoke about these horrors like they were minor inconveniences. Captain, he finally managed, how did your species survive on such a world? Bradley's answer was simple, delivered with a matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an obvious truth. We didn't just survive, document. We thrived. Every challenge that world threw at us made us stronger, more adaptable, more determined. What you're calling a death world, we call home. It's the place that taught us that impossible just means nobody's figured out how to do it yet. Dr. Zelfin stood at the observation deck, watching the Resilience prepare for its jump back into hyperspace. The human ship's engines were warming up with a sound that his station sensors barely recognized. Not the smooth hum of refined technology, but something rawer, more powerful. It was the sound of controlled explosions being harnessed by beings who understood that sometimes the best solutions weren't the prettiest ones. As he watched, something fundamental shifted in how Zelfin saw the universe. For 40 years, he believed in the natural order of galactic civilization. The hegemony provided security and stability. The Trade Consortium handled commerce and logistics. The Academic Alliance advanced knowledge and technology. Smaller powers filled specialized roles, and everyone knew their place in the grand scheme of things. But that entire worldview had just been shattered by a patchwork ship and 5 humans who treated impossible problems like routine maintenance issues. These weren't the primitive savages that galactic intelligence reports had suggested. The idea was laughable now that he'd seen them work. Primitive? These beings had just performed repairs that would have challenged the best engineering teams in civilized space. They'd done it with hand tools, improvised solutions, and a casual competence that spoke of abilities far beyond what any galactic power possessed. Savage? Zelfin had watched Captain Bradley risk his own life to save strangers, had seen the human crew work together with precision and trust that most military units would envy. There was nothing savage about beings who would cross the galaxy to answer a distress call that everyone else had ignored. No, the humans weren't primitive or savage. They were something far more remarkable, and Zelfin was beginning to realize far more dangerous to the established order. They were what happened when an intelligent species evolved under conditions that would kill most galactic citizens within hours. Doc. Bradley's voice crackled to the calm one last time, interrupting Zelfin's thoughts. Just want to let you know, Earth's getting pretty tired of this whole isolation thing. We got explorer ships pushing past the quarantine zones every month now, and honestly, The bureaucrats back home are starting to question why we're letting a bunch of species who couldn't even rescue 12-stranded scientists tell us where we can and can't go. The casual way Bradley delivered this information sent ice through Zelthan's veins. Human ships, designed and crewed by beings who consider death world conditions normal, were already moving beyond their quarantine system. They were making contact with other species, other worlds, probably other civilizations that had no idea what they were dealing with. "Captain," Zelthan found himself saying, "when you return to Earth, who will you report this rescue to? Your government, your military?" Bradley's laugh came through clearly. "That's the thing about humans. Document. We don't really do things the way other species seem to. Yeah, there'll be reports filed, debriefings conducted, that sort of thing. But the real decision-makers? They're probably going to be more interested in why 12 Karathi scientists were left to die when every major galactic power had the resources to save them." The implications hit Zelthan like a meteor impact. The humans weren't just exploring beyond their quarantine. They were evaluating the galaxy they found. And from their perspective, what they discovered so far wasn't particularly impressive. A collection of civilizations that talked big about cooperation and mutual aid, but abandoned those in need when helping became inconvenient or expensive. "Safe travels, Doc," Bradley concluded. "And if you ever find yourself in trouble again, remember, Earth answers its calls." The Resilience disappeared into hyperspace with a flash of light that seemed brighter and more violent than the clean transitions Zelthan was used to seeing. Even their jump drives, he realized, were designed by beings who weren't afraid of a little controlled chaos. Alone now on the observation deck of his fully functional research station, Zelthan made his way to his personal quarters and sat down at his writing desk. The report he needed to file would change everything, and he knew it. But the galaxy deserved to know the truth about what was coming. His hands shook as he began typing, not from fear of the humans, but from fear of what the established powers would do when they realized their comfortable assumptions about galactic hierarchy were about to be challenged. The galaxy had spent decades treating the humans like a problem that would solve itself through isolation and neglect, label their world as forbidden, mark their system as quarantined, and eventually they'd either destroy themselves or remain trapped on their death world forever. It was a neat solution that let everyone sleep peacefully in their climate-controlled habitats and carefully regulated environments. But Zelthan now understood the terrible miscalculation at the heart of that strategy. Humanity wasn't dangerous because they were violent or unpredictable. They were dangerous because they were competent in ways the galaxy had forgotten how to be. They were the survivors of a world that had tested every aspect of their being and forged them into something unprecedented. A species that saw challenges as opportunities and impossible problems as puzzles waiting to be solved. When the next crisis came, and crises always came in a galaxy full of competing powers and limited resources, the established civilizations would once again prove inadequate to the challenge. They'd debate and negotiate and calculate costs while beings died waiting for help that would never arrive. But now there would be those who remembered that somewhere in the darkness, beyond the quarantine zones and warning labels, the Deathworlders were waiting to answer the call. And when that day came, the galaxy's comfortable assumptions about who held real power would be tested in ways that no one was prepared for. Zelthan finished his report as the station's newly repaired life support systems hummed efficiently around him, and began preparing to send a message that would change everything.